Hello, Sas. How are you?
Hello. Very well. How are you?
Great. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Uh, Let me introduce you to the audience. You were a former international sportswoman and you're presently the chief storyteller at My Storyteller. You're also a speaker and a published children's author. And you have your own training company, which pivots in leadership and sales through stories. Wonderful, Sas. Wonderful. I would love to hear you speak on your topic, why sharing your story will ensure organizational success.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And can I just say it's a pleasure to be here today, surrounded by such amazing storytellers. So thank you so much for the invitation to speak. So yes, I'm going to be talking today around why it's really important that you share your story as leaders, as entrepreneurs, as business owners, wherever you are within your organization, to your team and the wider organization to ensure success. Now, I'm doing this without slides today. I'm just going to be talking to you and telling you some stories because, of course, we are all storytellers within this room. So why do I think it's really important that you share your story? Well, the first thing is to think about the story you're going to be telling. It can be extremely powerful and quite a bold move to share your story or part of your story. However, it can go horribly wrong, which I'm sure you've all seen before and heard. So the first thing to ask yourself is, why are you sharing your story? Is it purely to big yourself up, maybe selfish reasons? Or more importantly, do you want to impart some value and make an impact within your organization? If it's the latter, then you're on the right track. So let's think about, what does your team get from listening to your story? Well, potentially inspiration, maybe a clearer idea about what makes you tick and who you are, or maybe an increased level of respect for you. I think it's really important when you're telling your story that you include the messy bits as well as the highlights, the things that went well. We're also often quite good, yes, this went well and this went well, but actually the decisions I made along this part of my career and journey were probably the wrong ones looking back with hindsight. So share the messy bits as well as the highlights. I want to take you back into the past. Can you remember a story being shared with you by maybe a line manager, a VP, a president, a director, someone higher up in your organization, and they shared that story with you? What impact did it have on you? What did you take away from hearing that story? I remember myself as a young lady in her 20s, and a director from the organization I worked for sharing part of his story. He shared that when he'd left the army and gone on to Civvy Street, as they call it, he found it really hard to adapt, as many people do when they leave the military. What happened was that he started asking for help, and it was something that didn't really come very easy to him. His pride got in the way. His key message was that wherever you sit within the organization, whatever level you are and whatever years of experience you have, it is always important to ask for help and not let pride and ego get in the way. Now, that message has stuck with me ever since. Now, if he told me that in a different way, would have it stuck with me? Probably not. But the impact of his sharing his story and the struggles he'd had stuck with me in my 20s and has stuck with me now for the last 20 years. So let's address why it's important to share. Firstly, it builds connection. Connecting with people is extremely powerful. And as you've heard today, stories are a way as human beings we connect. Over the centuries that we've been around on this planet, we connect through storytelling. Whether it's orally, written, and now digitally, we always use stories to connect with other human beings. If you share your story for your team, it demonstrates that you trust them. You are opening up a part of you. You are trusting them with your story. You're also showing that you're human. We often put people on a pedestal, don't we? Particularly within an organization, maybe that's someone we admire, maybe higher up in an organization. We might have done it as children, as a previous speaker mentioned, as children are fantastic storytellers themselves. But as a story, we might have put a teacher on a pedestal, but it shows that we're human. It might also show that it gives permission for people to share, other people to share their story. And I call them access points. Have you ever been at a party, barbecue, when we were obviously allowed to meet more? For us, I'm speaking from the UK today, so we're all in very strange lockdowns here. So the rules on how we can meet with people. But when we did, in big parties and barbecues or dinner parties, over sharing food, you might share a story, a humorous story, or maybe a personal story, a sad story. But it gives permission for someone else to share their story with you. And that's no different in an organization. Just because you're in a work setting, that shouldn't be different. Why also share? Well, it instills respect. There's a level of respect that comes from sharing part of your story. It also, as a leader, particularly if you've set up the company, you're one of the founders, it explains your ideas. Maybe you're in a position of power where you've got a great idea, you want to communicate a new idea, you want to change the organization, change the direction. Well, sharing part of your story is a great way to do that. Another way I've seen it work when we work with organizations, it actually helps to diffuse conflict or tension. So if there's any conflict or tension between individuals, teams, within an organization, a wider organization, storytelling, sharing part of your story really helps to diffuse that. It also builds empathy and rapport and can smooth the implementation of change. Now, in this very virtual world we're living in at the moment, an important aspect we're hearing from organizations is how do I maintain and build community? Bringing together my team when we're physically not able to meet. Tell a story, share part of your story is what I say to them. It helps bridge that gap, particularly if, as the question was asked earlier, when you have maybe millennials, Generation Z, older generation, and people as old as me. How do we bridge that gap? Okay, well, tell part of your story, build that community. Why do you read autobiographies of leaders that you admire? You know, why do we read stories perhaps of the late Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or Warren Buffett, or perhaps a sports person, such as I've recently read Johnny Barstow's, we go back to the cricket analogy, book, or Sachin Tendulkar. You know, there are such amazing books out there from leaders. Why do we learn them? Why do we want to hear their story? Do we hope to emanate them? Do we hope to learn from them, learn from their mistakes? I think probably all of that. An interesting statistic, an interesting marketing professor, Jennifer Aker at Stanford, did a very quick kind of research project, and she gave her students a 1-minute pitch. They had to stand up and do a 1-minute pitch. Now, 1 in 10 students used a story within his or her pitch, while the others stuck to a more traditional pitch element, such as facts, figures, graphs. And the professor asked the class to write down everything they remembered about each pitch, so each student. 5% of students remembered as statistics, but 63% remembered the story. So as a leader, if you want to get a point across, you want to communicate a new idea, implement change, then why not share part of your story in there to get your point across? For less experienced members of your organization, it really does show a clear path. So finally, I want to talk about how building your story is really important. How do you go about kind of building that story? Well, you've heard a lot today from amazing storytellers, and all the speakers here are fantastic storytellers themselves, you know, about how you craft your story. And there's lots of different ways out to do that. You Google, you know, creating a story, you'll get tens of thousands of different results. But there's a couple of formats I found, really simple formats, and I'm quite a simple person, that I found works really well. And the first thing is to think about, who are your audience? Yep, who are your audience? What's their values? What are their beliefs? What's their previous experience with this subject? Start with them. The next step is, what's the one key message you want to get across? Yep. For example, I could share, when I first set up our training company, we talked about not all business is good business. Now, I knew that logically, but when you're set up on your own, you say yes to any business that comes along without actually thinking through it. And I learned early on, we took on a potential client that, looking back with hindsight, I shouldn't have taken on. Their values and ethics and the way they sold wasn't in line with mine and the organization that I was building. I should have said no to the business. What's the one key message I would want to get across in telling that story is it's okay to say no to the business. Think very carefully how you formulate the story. One way I like, because I'm a bit of a troublemaker and a bit of a disruptor, is the troublemaking structure. This is when you start the story right in the middle of the challenge or the issue. Okay, so think about a great film, great story that you love, and a book you love reading, and they launch you straight into the middle of the challenge, the issue, whatever it is. Okay, very good at pilot sessions. For example, you watch a Netflix series, a lot of us are doing that at the moment. The pilot episode is so important, and we arrive at the scene. I could tell the story of when I broke down at 1 o'clock in the morning in a particularly dodgy place in London. I was a female in my late 20s, no mobile phones then, that's how old I am. And I could start the story from there and what I learned from that particular story. You can, as a leader, if you're standing up and you're talking to your organization and you're talking about you're sharing your story, you can share a story from the past. You can share a story from the present, but you also can share a story of the future. What do I mean by that? Well, it's future pacing. This is what I envisage the organization to look like. With my experience, this is my vision. Tell a story around it. People, if you want to model great storytellers of the future, Oprah Winfrey's one. Martin Luther King Jr. was a fantastic future pacing storyteller. Brian Chesky, Airbnb, the co-founder and CEO, he's an amazing storyteller, particularly of the future. He really paints a wonderful picture. And he shares a lot of himself in that. So what I want to kind of leave you with, if you are feeling reluctant, if you're feeling kind of a little kind of shy, a little bit introverted in regards to sharing part of your story, think about the disservice you're doing to your organization. By sharing a part of your story, you're saying to your organization, I am here, I am making connections with you. I'm here to listen. I'm also human. You are helping the less experienced members of your organization show there's a clear path to follow. The decisions are made, that you don't always make the right decision. An interesting research that came out of Spain in 2006, and for those who like statistics or like this, is they took a group of students and they told them stories. They told them stories. A lot of it was Harry Potter based, but there were a lot of other stories in there. And what they found, they checked out they regulated and checked out took brain scans. And they found their part of their brain that you would expect to react, by the linguistic part of our cortex, reacted. You'd expect that. But all the other areas of our brain started pinging off too. And for those amongst us who are much more scientifically orientated than I am, we'll tell you more about how the brain works. However, what had the audio, the visual part of it, all part of our brains was pinging off. Then they told a story that was very fact-based, very data-led, had some graphs, and then we love our PowerPoint, don't we? Put up our lovely graphs and our pie charts. And do you know what happened? All parts of their brain went off apart from the linguistic processing part of their cortex. So what that tells us is we feel stories. We feel stories. So if you work particularly in an organization that's very data-led and very technical, I worked in IT for many years, you know, a lot of jargon in there.
For some time, you have 3 minutes left.
Thank you very much. Then think about how can you tell your story from a particular point of view, weaving that data in, weaving that kind of that information and technical jargon in, but make it into a story. So I want to leave you with one last tip. Go out there, give it a go. Why not give it a go this week with your team? That's my challenge to you. Share a part of your story or one of your stories from your life with your organization, and you'd be quite surprised by the success you'll have. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Sas. I would like to compliment you as a very natural speaker, and your points have been well taken, especially the one where you said your audience and the message. These are the 2 most important things in storytelling. And you mentioned about humorous stories. There is one question from Mr. Sahil Khan. He says, could you please elaborate more on the human part of storytelling?
Yes, the human part of storytelling is more about talking about the emotions, expressing the emotions that you were feeling at the time. So we're very good when we tell a story about, I went here, I went there at this time, this, facts, putting the kind of the chronological viewpoint of a story. What the human part is really opening up and sharing those emotions. How were you feeling? Well, I was quite scared. I didn't know that. I was confused. This is what, and talking through what the thought processes were going through in your brain at the time.
Just one last question. How does a funny story motivate and change opinions of a human being?
Oh, using a funny and humorous story.
How does it motivate and change opinions?
Oh, great. So that's a really good question. Humor it breaks down barriers. Humor, particularly, I was saying I can say from the British point of view, we like to take the mick out of ourselves. But humor, and used in the right way, okay, you have to be very careful with humor, but used in the right way can break down barriers, because people are much more relaxed. They relax. So if I tell you a funny story, you find it funny, you smile. Happy endorphins are released. We start connecting. So a happy story is a great way to break down those barriers, get someone alongside you, and then help to really understand what motivates them.
Wonderful, wonderful. That was a wonderful way of putting things across. I really like it. Thank you so much. Thank you for the share.
Thank you.